We might be live at this point. We're a couple minutes early today, so we will wait to have more people log in, and we'll start promptly at 7 o'clock. So welcome. I'm glad that you're here. Again, if you're just now tuning in, we will be starting promptly at 7 o'clock. Good morning, welcome. All right. Well, good morning, friends. Welcome to the second of a series of videos live on YouTube about AP Music Theory. My name is Mindy Foote, and I am a teacher at Valencia High School in Placentia, California. So since I'm over on the West Coast, it is now 7 o'clock a.m. I suppose it's not 7 o'clock where you might be, but I assume all of my students are asleep in bed right now. Shout out to any of my third period AP Music Theory kids who actually got out of bed to watch me live. But, you know, we'll see how it goes. A fun fact about myself, in addition to teaching AP Music Theory, I also teach Algebra 2 Trig. That may be surprising to hear that I teach math and music, but those two topics have a lot in common. And sometimes you'll even hear me using some math analogies as we teach lessons over the next coming weeks. Hopefully you were able to watch my colleague, Dr. Eder, yesterday introduce the concept of secondary dominance to you. If you didn't, his video is now posted on the AP YouTube channel, and my video will be posted there later to watch. So before we begin with our lesson, I just wanted to clarify the reasoning behind why we are beginning with some lessons on Unit 7. The College Board recently came out with this information about some adjustments to the AP test this year. So the exam questions will only cover units 1 through 6. However, we know that we take our AP classes not just to get ready for a test, but to have a comprehensive education. And those of you who are moving on and taking more music theory classes in college, it is really important that you understand the concepts from Unit 7 and 8 so that you don't have any gaps in your education. So although what we go over today will not be explicitly tested on this year in 2020, some of the skills that we'll be doing with part writing and chord spelling will still be applicable. So without further ado, I would like you to do a little quick write. Now, I am assuming that you are sitting at a desk, in which case you could actually get out a physical piece of paper and a pencil and write these things down, not just think about, but actually do a quick write here about what are all the different rules that you know. I don't want you to actually complete the progression that's on the page right now. I want you to look at it as simply an example to get your brains moving in the kind of problem that we'll be doing today. And I want you to think about what are all of the different restrictions that my teacher has taught me over the years so far, all of the different rules that we need to follow. Now, if you are just laying in bed right now, I suppose you could do this in your head still, but I would encourage you to actually write some things down. Perhaps you've seen this diagram before. It comes from the scoring guidelines released by the College Board each year about how the free response, specifically questions 5 and 6, are graded. And hopefully this is going to help to jog your memory on some things. We see some examples of parallel fifths, octaves, unisons, hidden fifths, voice crossing, overlapping voices. Hopefully these are things that you've learned about before in your AP Music Theory class. We will talk more about these things in greater detail later when we get into our review sessions. Today, I'm just kind of refreshing your memory, so I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on these. Maybe you wrote down some things about doubling. As we know, triads have only 3 pitches, but when we have soprano, alto, tenor, bass, then one note needs to be doubled. And there are some rules about that. Spacing, resolutions. This is going to be a really big one for today's lesson. Leading tones need to resolve up by step and chordal sevenths resolve down. One of the last things, and honestly, I think one of the most important things that sometimes people aren't thinking about is that we want to have nice, smooth upper voices. We want our parts to be very boring and easy to sing, avoiding leaps. And of course, we need the correct chord spelling, because even if we have great voice leading, if our chord is spelled incorrectly, then this is going to be a disaster when it comes to grading your FRQ. And we're going to look at an example of that in a little bit. So today we are focusing on topic 7.2, which is part writing using secondary dominant chords. This skill here is absolutely applicable to the AP test this year in 2020. Apply knowledge of common practice tonality to spell chords and to follow procedures of 18th century voice leading to connect chords and harmonic progressions. What that is saying is basically we're doing our SATB voice writing, and even if our FRQ this year for 2020 doesn't have a secondary dominant in it, all of these skills that we'll be talking about today will still be applicable. So 7.2, Dr. Eder talked yesterday about tonicization and the idea of momentarily thinking of a new chord as the tonic. And our essential knowledge here gets into a bit of our resolutions, and we'll go into more detail on this on the subsequent pages. So let's dive into an actual problem here. This is what I'm excited about today. Dr. Eder showed you a method of doing this yesterday, and we're going to continue that method, but without the fancy worksheet. We're just going to show our work down below each one of these chords. So I'm going to get my pen ready. We'll use black ink. My recommendation is anytime you have a secondary dominant, we skip it. We're going to start with the chord that follows the secondary dominant. So we're in the key of A major. If we count up to 5, A, B, C, D, E, the root of our 5 chord, E, G sharp, B. Then we're going to take the 5th of that chord and slide it over, and that becomes the root of our secondary dominant, 5 of 5. So if we start by just jotting down the note names, B, D, F, and the 4-3 indicates that we want the 7th, so A, we need to add accidentals to make this a major minor 7th chord. This is a dominant 7th. If there were no figure bass symbols indicating that you want it to have a 7th, then we would want it just to be a major triad. Now, one way to do this is to think about our temporary tonic. Even though the key signature shows that we're in the key of A, we are currently tonicizing the key of E. We are momentarily pretending like we are in the key of E, in which case we actually need a D sharp and an F sharp. The other way that you can think about this is if you remember back when you studied 7th chords, a major minor 7th chord means that this triad needs to be a major triad. And if we had left the D as a D natural, as the key signature indicates in the key of A major, then that would be a minor triad, and we want it to be a major triad. It's called a major minor 7th because then after that major triad on the bottom, we need a minor 7th from the root to the 7th. You could count up. I find that sevenths are always tricky because they're just so far away. So instead, if you think about the inversion, a minor seventh going down would be a whole step, 2 half steps. So if you picture a piano keyboard starting on a B, 2 half steps down takes us to an A. So the A is good. All right, the next thing we're going to do is take note of the inversion, and we need to put the bass in first. So of course we know 7 is root position, 6-5 is first inversion, 4-3 is second inversion, and 4-2 is third inversion. So in this case, they're asking us to write a 4-3 chord, so we're going to put this F sharp in the bass. We don't need to add a sharp in front of it because it's already part of the key there. Then, in terms of how we arrange the other voices, you have lots of freedom. Of course, the one rule we want to be thinking about is having good spacing. We don't want any adjacent upper voices to be more than an octave apart. So, I don't know, how about let's put the A here, and I'll put the D sharp here in the alto. Making sure that we alter that pitch. That's really important. Every secondary dominant chord will have at least one accidental, and our A. Okay, so Dr. Eder yesterday just had you resolving the chordal seventh. In this case, that would be the A, and the A needs to go down to a G in our 5 chord. Now today we're going to be resolving all of our notes. We're going to write in the entire second chord. I like to draw arrows in. You don't have to do this, but especially when you're learning, it's nice to see. Your teacher will be happy to see, oh, there's the chordal seventh clearly resolved. The next thing that we can put in is the root. We don't get to choose what position it's in. It tells me that this is root position. So the bass has to be the E. All right, here's our new part today. When we think about leading tones, in the key of A major, the leading tone, of course, is G sharp. And those would come up in 5 chords, like at a authentic cadence. If we have a G sharp, we need that to resolve up to an A if it's in an outer voice. Now, in this secondary dominant, this 5 of 5, we are momentarily tonicizing E. So if E is our new tonic, then what is our new leading tone? D sharp. We call this the secondary leading tone because it's not the actual leading tone. We're in the key of A, but it's the leading tone of our secondary dominant. So this D sharp here, which happens to be in the alto, needs to resolve up to an E. The nice thing is then I have very little to decide at the end. I just have the tenor voice I have to fill in, which doesn't have a stem right now. Okay, so let's see what I have so far. I have an E, another E, a G. That would leave me with a B if I wanted to have a complete spelling of the 5 chord. Let's see what the tenor is coming from. A to B would be nice, smooth voice leading, no weird leaps or anything. One of the questions my students ask sometimes is, how do you check for parallel fifths and parallel octaves? It's so easy to miss them sometimes. So here's a little trick for you. Obviously, we know in math that parallel lines are never going to intersect each other. So if one voice is going up and one voice is going down, we call that contrary motion, then of course they cannot possibly be parallel to each other. So starting down at the bass, although you could start anywhere, I just want you to think about whether the voice is going up or down. Our bass is going down, our tenor is going up. So clearly those are not parallel. The alto is going up and the tenor was going up. So we have to watch out for that. If we count A, B, C, D, E, it is a fifth, but wait, A, B, C, D, it's only a fourth. Parallel fours are fine, not a problem. And then we get up to the soprano and our soprano is going down. Our bass was also going down, so we need to check for parallels there. And again, counting from the F sharp to the A, F, G, A is only a third, so parallels is not even an issue that we have to think about on this problem. Okay, one of the other things that I want to point out to you before we move on here is especially the way I have it voiced here, the alto and the soprano make a tritone, right? We know what a tritone is. This is the wonderful thing about a dominant seventh chord, is that it has this dissonance that resolves to consonants. So we see that diminished fifth resolve to a major third, which is just lovely. So let's have you try one on your own. Now, obviously, I'm going to work through it with you, but really, if you are sitting at home in front of your desk, I would encourage you to grab a piece of staff paper and follow along and see if you can complete this with me. We are going to start with the chord that follows the secondary dominant. So counting on our fingers up from E, E, F, G, A, B, D sharp, F sharp is our 5 chord. And honestly, if you wanted to put the bass of that chord in right away, you could, because, you know, we know what that inversion is. But we'll follow the same procedure as last time, moving that fifth of the 5 chord over, and that becomes the root. One of the things that's really important to note is that we are starting on an F sharp, not an F natural, because we're in the key of E here. So when I just put in my letter names, F, A, C, E, we're building off of an F sharp for this major minor seventh. So it would be F sharp, A sharp, C sharp. And thinking about whether we need to alter the E or not, if we start on F sharp and count down 2 half steps, we land on an E, so that minor seventh is good to go. Remember, the other thing that you can do is think about that we are momentarily tonicizing the B over here. So that means in the key of B, we would need the A sharp. All right, this time we are in first inversion. So the A sharp is going to be in the bass. Which A sharp do we want him to be on? Oh, I don't know. I guess we'll put him up high because it's pretty early in the morning. All righty, and then how about a C in the tenor? C sharp, but we don't need the sharp because it's part of the key. And then I'm going to do an F sharp here, and that would leave me with an E way up here. Sorry, sopranos. Okay, so now when we resolve all of our notes, the 2 notes that I need you to be very aware of is resolving the 7th. Our chordal 7th in this case is E. It goes down to a D. Draw on the arrow if you want. And our secondary leading tone. Remember, we are momentarily pretending like we are in the key of B. So the secondary leading tone is the A sharp. And since it's in the bass, we would have automatically resolved it anyway. That's the nice thing about these first inversion chords. But I'm still going to draw my arrow to show that I properly resolved that. So now I have 2 chords or 2 tones that I have to deal with. One of the things that I ask my students to think about is always having everything very boring. So for example, the alto is on an F right now. And when I look at the pitches that I need in my 5 chord, an F is an option, an F sharp. So that would be very lovely and boring if the altos could just hold that F sharp the entire time. We want to keep common tones as much as possible. And what does that leave me with now for my tenor, which I can't seem to manage to remember to draw stems for? Let's see. In a root position 5 chord, the most traditional doubling would be to double the root. So even though the bass is already singing this B, we can easily have the tenor join him by simply adding a stem right there. Looks good. Let's do one more. At first glance, well, you might be panicking because it's in minor. Don't let that scare you. 5, 7 of 4 to 4, you might be thinking, great, this is root position. But I need to warn you ahead of time. When we have a root position, secondary dominant going to another root position triad, sometimes we're going to have some problems that we have to deal with. So let's do this. We need to count up to 4 in the key of D, D, E, F, G. And because we're in D minor, we have a B flat, D. That would be our 4 chord. Now our D slides over and becomes the root of our secondary dominant. And if we first just jot down our letter names, D, skip E, F, skip G, A, skip B, C, we need to change this into a major minor seventh chord now. So it would be D, F sharp, A. We are momentarily tonicizing G, so the F needs to be an F sharp. And is D to C a minor seventh? Yes, it is. So we're ready to go. Root position. So D in the bass. How about an A? And what do we want next? Let's do an F sharp here. And that would leave me with a C up in the top. So, by the way, your seventh doesn't have to be in the soprano. I feel like it just so happens to be in the soprano twice in a row now, maybe 3 times in a row. I'm going to resolve that seventh pitch down first. So my C would go down to a B in the subsequent chord. And my secondary leading tone is the F sharp, needs to go up to G, resolving that tritone nicely. And since this is root position, then we need a G in the bass. And here's where it gets a little tricky. At first glance, you might think to yourself, all right, I have 2 G's, a B, I need a D. So I've got 1 note left. I better have that tenor leap up to a D. And I know my teacher said to try and have no leaps, but oh well, I'm gonna have it leap anyway. No, you can't do that because, oh God, should I actually draw it in? This is scary here. I'll get out my red pen here. What, can you find the mistake? What happened? The fact that I put a D in there right now is that we now have parallel fifths. So how do we fix this? Instead of having a D, we are going to omit the fifth. It turns out this is very common. When you have a root position, secondary dominant, resolving to a root position tonic. It's not really a tonic, it's a 4 chord, but it's very common that we're going to have these parallel fifths. So when we think about a triad, you obviously can't leave out the root of a chord. That's what establishes that it's a G minor chord. You can never leave out the third of the chord because that determines its mode, whether it's major or minor, right? The fifth is sort of expendable. If we play this without the fifth in there, nobody is really going to miss it. So what should we have instead? We already have 2 roots and 1/3. The most common way of doing this is then to have 3 roots and 1/3, which of course is very nice voice leading here with the tenor just a step down. So checking for parallels now, I look at my bass and it is leaping up. The tenor is stepping down, the alto is stepping up, so far no parallel issues, and then the soprano is stepping down, so back to the tenor because he was also going down and the soprano is going down. That's the only danger of parallels right now. If I count from A to C, A, B, C, that's only a third, parallel thirds, not a problem. Okay, so I like to call these last problems that we were doing, I call these chicken nuggets because they're just cute little 2 chord things. We are ready for a chicken strip now. By the way, if you watched Dr. Eater yesterday, he was dissecting the whole chicken, an actual piece of music. This would be a chicken strip. Now, we can see here in the middle, and by the way, this is from the 2018 actual exam, FRQ 6, you can see that we have a secondary dominant. So we know all about how to spell this properly and how to write and resolve it. And we could take the time to analyze or to actually part write all of this ourselves. But instead, what I thought would be fun is let's look at a student sample because finding other people's mistakes are always better than finding your own mistakes. Okay, let's see if I can unzoom this here. Well, there we go. Okay, so I'm going to get out my red pen because I'm ready to grade this student. What I love about the student's response is that he or she showed their work down at the bottom here. That's so important. If you don't show your work on the AP test, they're not going to take points off. Of course, they're just going to be looking at your notes. But when I see this, I can see that this student knows what they're doing. So their 5 chord in the key of G, G, A, B, C, D, and they like to put the, they spell their chords differently than Dr. Eder and I do, where we spell them from the bottom up, but that's fine. I'm going to put in an F sharp down here. Again, this is just them taking little notes for themselves, but you're going to see why in a little bit that I like to do this, A and C. And they put those notes in here and it's looking good. Look, they resolved their 7th nicely, good work. And what is our leading tone? Oh, well, it's in the bass, so we don't have to worry about that. And we have a GBD, looking good. And then we get to our secondary dominant. As you know, when you get to a secondary dominant, I ask that you move on and look at the chord after it first. So our 2 chord in the key of G would be A, C, E. Then we take this 5th, the E, and we slide it over, and the E becomes the root of our secondary dominant. So we have E, G, B, D. Think for a moment, what did this student do wrong? They have it in the right inversion. They have good spacing, but they are missing the altered pitch. Instead of a G, it should have been a G sharp. Right now, it's a minor triad. And you might be thinking to yourself, this is not that big of a deal. All they did was they forgot one accidental. What is that, like -1? It is time for us to dive into how these are graded. On FRQ 6, it's worth 18 points altogether. The chord spelling is 6 points, 1 point per chord. And, there's more details that I haven't put on this slide, but basically what we want to think about right now is that for every chord you spell correctly, you get a point. It has to be in proper inversion. And of course, you have to have all of the correct accidentals. Notice it also says if the accidental is on the wrong side of the note, then that is considered wrong. So even though we say G sharp, the sharp of course goes in front of the note head, not behind the note head. If you spell the chord wrong, then you don't get a point for that chord, which might not seem like that big of a deal because that's just -1 point. However, then there are 12 points available to you for all of the voice leading between each chord. And it says right here, award 0 points for voice leading into and out of these chords. So what that means is this little missing accidental right now, he is or she is no longer eligible to receive any of the voice leading points on either side of that chord. That is devastating. So if we look at the points that this person actually did earn here, and the College Board says this represents a fair response. I would rather not have the word fair to describe my work, but it's not bad. They misspelled the secondary dominant, missing the G sharp there. Therefore, they only got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 out of the 6 available points for correct chord spelling. Where this person really lost all of their points was based on the voice leading. So you get 2 points for good voice leading. So including the chord that's already given to you, they resolved that one fine. And then 2 more points because this chord was spelled incorrectly. They're automatically not eligible for any of those points into and out of that chord. So can you please examine these next 2 chords? They're spelled correctly, you can tell because we gave them the 1 point up there. Why did this person only get no points here? Hopefully you were able to find the parallel fifths. Again, that's something that's so easy to miss. So let's use that technique where we look at each voice individually and think about its direction. We have the bass, which is leaping up, but it's leaping up a fourth. The tenor is also leaping, but it's only leaping a third. The alto is leaping up, and that's leaping up a fourth. And the soprano is actually leaping up a fourth also, although that is an augmented fourth. So when we go back to the bass and we look at the alto, A to E is a perfect fifth, and D to A is a perfect fifth. So this is parallel fifths. The way that we could avoid that, how this person should have done a 2 chord, we call a predominant because it comes before the 5, which is a dominant. Anytime you have a predominant to a dominant, you're always in danger of having parallel fifths. So we want to use contrary motion. When the bass is going up, let's have all of these other voices go down instead. And why did this person lose points here on the last progression also from chord, what is that, chord 7 to chord 8, or no, chord 6 to chord 7? Well, one of our rules that we brainstormed at the beginning of our lesson today was about resolving our leading tones. This isn't even a secondary leading tone that we have to worry about. We're just worried about regular leading tones in the key of G. Our leading tone is an F sharp. And when that leading tone is up in the soprano especially, we need her to resolve up to tonic at the end, which would make this a perfect authentic cadence instead of an imperfect authentic cadence, which is nicer for our ear also. So in the AP music theory teacher world, we sometimes call this the triangle of death. Once you misspell a chord, you lose that point for the chord spelling, but you also lose the voice leading on either side, which can be really devastating to your grade. Think about if this person had just put in that G sharp, now this would have been correct, and potentially, we won't examine it too closely, they could have gotten up to 4 more points on their voice leading, taking their score of a 9 up to a 14. Wouldn't that have been nice? It's still not a perfect response, but just by missing that one accidental can be really, really devastating to your grade. So I am going to be assigning you some homework to do between now and the next time I see you. Dr. Eder and I are going to be alternating days most of the time. And so I know Dr. Eder gave you an assignment to do, and he will be going over that assignment with you tomorrow. This assignment, you can see, is from the 2019 music theory test. This is FRQ 6. And of course, we have our secondary dominant in there. So when you get to this chord, you need to be really, really careful to watch for that altered tone. Of course, all of your resolutions, I want you to be careful with those too. You can find this, of course, you can just do it on a regular piece of scrap paper that you might have at home, but you can also find this posted on the College Board website with all of the practice FRQs. So thank you for tuning in, especially those of you who are on the West Coast, and it's very early, but I wanted to also mention real quick before we go, the College Board is obviously making lots of changes to the AP test for this year, and they have some concerns about technical issues that students might have, especially if you are going to be taking the exam at home. We want to make sure that you have the proper devices that will be necessary to do this, whether you're accessing this video right now on your phone, for example, or if you have a computer. So they are asking you to go to this website and fill out a quick survey, especially if you or a friend in your class, you know that they have some concerns about the requirements of taking an AP test at home. So again, thank you for tuning in, and I hope to see you all next week when we dive into Unit 8.